So I'm in my room. My computer is on in front of me with my microphone. There's a notepad open with some notes about my podcast. It's time to rewind. It looks like they're on the opening scene of Memento that starts at the beginning of the movie and ends at 2 minutes and 32 seconds with Teddy screaming no backwards. There seems to also be a Skype window open. Hang on.
Hello, this is Eric Deutsch, and I'm very excited to discuss this movie with you, and I want to state that I have a very great long-term memory, but my short-term memory these days is not so great.
Look, you need to listen to me. You need to listen very carefully. We've got a very intense movie that we need to go through. I'm a literature teacher. I'm a film nerd. I know what I'm talking about. You need to pay attention to me. My name is Leaheey.
That's right. I assume I've already told you about Memento, and my name is Bubbawheat, and I have a condition where I host a podcast here.
Oh, we know about your condition,
No.
Bubba.
Well, thank you both for joining me for this project, and for listeners at home, this is the first episode of this Memento season. It's not entirely a time loop, but I feel like within the context of the film and the way it's presented, that Leonard is almost experiencing his own time loop. And I was listening a bit to the commentary for this movie this morning, and even Christopher Nolan does refer to the color scenes as a loop in time. So Christopher Nolan agrees with me that this is a time loop movie.
You know you're right when the professionals agree with you.
Yes, and we're going to be taking this season. It's going to be released in the order that it is presented within the film. And Lisa, I have you joining me for all the black and white scenes that are going forward in chronological order.
Yes, sir.
And Eric is going to be joining me for all the color scenes that are happening in reverse chronological order.
You think, yes.
And this is the opening scene, and this is it's mainly just the Polaroid, develop or undeveloping in reverse motion. But before we jump into the scene, I figured, we can all talk about our experiences with the movie. And I think I'm going to start with Lisa, because I know you mentioned that you've actually taught this movie several
Every
times.
year, twice a year. Every year, twice a year, I teach it to my AP Literature seniors. We study the story that Jonathan Nolan wrote, which turns out to be a great discussion because I have them read it beforehand, and then they come in and they discuss it, and I don't say a word. We run a Socratic seminar where I have them, it's what's called a fishbowl seminar. So you have two circles, the inner circle and the outer circle. And the inner circle is the only group allowed to actually speak. And if you're familiar with the short story, Earl, the character in the short story, keeps hitting the snooze button. So I run my circle rounds in 9-minute intervals, which is great because students now have no clue that 9 minutes is the time length for a standard snooze button. So they usually have a bit of a mind-blown moment when, the 10-minute man and, oh, it's a snooze, and, oh, I see what you did there. It's just one goofy, nerdy thing after another. But then I show the Memento. I'm a big nerd for an atypical narrative structure. I saw this movie in the theater when it released. I went with a friend from college, and my mind was just blown. It was the summer before I began teaching. So, unlike Christopher Nolan's Inception, during which I sat there and said, how the hell do I teach this? I need to get this into my classes because I was already teaching Memento by then. It was just one of those things where it instantly became a favorite film. You don't get movies like this enough. You don't get these complicated narratives. You don't get these rides where you really are taken with the narrator, with your protagonist, on this journey where not even they know what's going on. And I love an unreliable narrator. I love when things unfold in surprising and fascinating ways. This movie is absolutely in my top 3 of all time. And it is a thrill to show it to students every year. I watch it twice a year because I have 2 classes that watch it. And just to watch their mouths drop open, to have them sticking around after the bell has rung to ask me more questions about it. I mean, there's nothing more enjoyable than showing a movie to the first time for other people. Because unfortunately, unlike Leonard and Earl, we will never get to see this movie again for the very first time.
Yeah, I do think it's so fascinating that, and I think we'll get to this as we discuss, especially the color scenes and even a little bit with the black and white scenes, but how each episode or each scene really has 2 different meanings. There's the meaning that you're presented with the first time around and how you interpret it versus how you interpret it knowing the entire film and what's actually going on.
Absolutely. So,
Eric, what's your history with this movie?
I actually wanted to ask Lisa a question based on something she said before you get to me. Since it's in a high school class, do you have to break the movie up over 2 days, I assume? 2 classes,
it kills
correct?
me. Yes, it ends up being about 2.5 class periods.
Okay.
So what typically happens, and it's, thank goodness this is the way it works, but my kids want to kill me. Usually the second day ends just after the Natalie sequence. The really good Natalie sequence where I have to stop the movie and they go, oh, no, wait, no. And they're like, I hate her. I knew I hated her. I hate her so much. And so now they're going to their next class angry. It's like, sorry, we don't know what to tell you.
Oh, that's great. What a strange way to watch this movie, breaking up over 3 days. Wow.
Oh, it sucks. But I do ensure that when the period ends, we're at the end of a chunk. I never end in the middle of a narrative section.
Yeah.
More often than not, though, I'll tell you, kids come in on day 2. And they go, I'm sorry, I had to watch it all last night. I couldn't get anymore. And I'm like, you know what? No problem, because now you get to enjoy watching everyone else watch it for the first time with me. So it's such a great time. I love it.
I can imagine. All right, so Eric, go ahead and let us know what your experience with the film is.
Yeah, so this was, I think when I saw this, I had only ever seen, as far as Christopher Nolan goes, Insomnia. So this was only the second movie of his that I had seen. And at that point, I wasn't really aware of who, quote unquote, Chris Nolan really was then. And much like Lisa, I mean, this movie, the first time I watched it, I was completely blown away by it. It immediately shot to the top of my movie list. I absolutely loved it. I wanted to watch it again. It actually was a movie that I had often considered doing a movie by minute 4. And so when I saw that you were doing it in this format, I said, well, I've got to jump at the chance here to be a part of the show. I love movies that I like to refer to as mind-f movies that just completely blow your mind and that you really have to think about it afterwards and that it's not obvious and that really turn your brain to Swiss cheese.
I love them.
This is, and this is one of the most Swiss cheesy movies there is. And I mean, Chris Nolan is the king of this kind of movie also. So it's a movie that swings big. He was not Chris Nolan yet at this point. And if this movie, if the premise didn't really work, who knows? He might have never made another movie,
No.
But he pulled it off. It's great. And I will say that I haven't at this point watched it in probably more than a year at this point, and I'm purposely not watching it all the way through again so that I can sort of go with the flow of the confusion of the show, so I won't quite 100% remember everything exactly until I watch the clips to prepare.
Yeah, one thing that I was surprised, because I did watch the movie just yesterday, last night, start to finish in the traditional order. I have seen it once in the special features chronological order, and I honestly don't remember exactly when I first discovered this, because I know Like I remember, I know that I saw Fight Club in theaters in 1999, and I got the special edition DVD. But it was even before we got a DVD player. That was the first DVD that I got because our computer had a DVD drive. But and this came out the following year in 2000. But I don't think that I saw this in theaters because I'm not sure, because I don't think it had a huge theatrical release.
No, this was pretty small because I remember I had to drive. I live in Rhode Island, and not like it's a big deal, but I had to drive into Massachusetts to get to it because the Rhode Island theaters weren't playing it.
Yeah, and I lived in a medium-sized town in central Illinois, so I don't know if I would have caught it at the local theaters because I think our biggest screen was an 8-screen theater, so yeah. It's very possible that this movie slipped through the cracks, but I definitely caught it whenever it was on home video, and whenever the 2-disc special edition set up like the psychological profile, I got that almost immediately, and I went through everything in it at the time, and I was surprised at how much I really remembered watching the movie. And I think part of it is because there is that extra repetition, because the beginning and ending of each scene has the 5 to 10 seconds of the repetition to reinforce the structure of the film. And so I definitely remembered all those touch points. And I also remembered a few other things. I even remembered something from the commentary in this opening scene, which I'll get to shortly, as we dive into the actual, what's presented in this opening shot, and how this opening shot really sets up the entire structure of the film, even though even though this opening scene really is a departure from the structure of the rest of the film in certain ways.
Well, this is the only scene in the film that is authentically in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about this movie as it's like, oh, it runs backwards, and people go, what? And it's like, well, technically it's not, but this is the only thing that authentically plays backwards. And it's like you said, Bubba, there's so many interesting things just in this small intro. And if I may, I'd like to touch on something that you just said about the way it is structured. The rest of the film, Christopher Nolan has sort of got this reputation as being this snobby filmmaker. Like sometimes he's like, oh, he thinks he's better than everyone else, or he's like, I'm going to make films the way I make films. I don't care about this because I'm making films for people who are, for theater goers. I'm not making it for people who are watching on their phone, whatever it is. But he is making this film for a viewer, because had he not included that 5 to 10 second overlap, this film would be a lot more difficult to follow, I think, for the average viewer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just one of those things where you take a craft and a story that you want to tell, and that the purpose of writing that story is for someone to receive it, to read it, to see it, to listen to it, whatever it is. And he definitely does do that here. And so I've always certainly appreciated that, because when you show a film like this to people who typically aren't into the mind F types of films, as Eric has coined them, my mother calls this artsy fartsy, and she hates it. She will not touch this movie. But you need something to orient people and to help them get used to your pattern in those first few scenes, and then they're with you for the ride. Nothing you could do.
Yeah.
I don't consider this movie artsy fartsy. That's interesting. Your mother says that. I don't see this. I mean, I'm a Chris Nolan fanboy, so I don't take it with a grain of salt. But I don't know that I see this movie that way, though.
Because of the scrambled chronology. And it's crazy because my mother is a reading specialist. My mother reads, but she doesn't like twisted narratives. She doesn't like her psychological thrillers show up on Lifetime. So, They don't, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just, before we get the hate mail on episode 1, there's nothing wrong with a Lifetime movie, but they're not complex. They're very comfortable, formulaic kinds of stories. And something like this, my mother's preference is she just wants to sit back and watch a movie. She doesn't want to have to think. And so, I don't know, apparently she found this too thinky for her.
I mean, yeah, I guess I can see that. I'm sure. I mean, I like watching movies where you turn your brain off also. Like it's if I have a headache, I'm not watching Memento, that's for sure.
No. And I mean, I'm a horror fan. God knows I'm watching some bad movies, but I don't know. When this comes, as you see a movie like this and you see it in the theater and I will walk on clouds for the rest of the month when you get a movie like this, because they just don't happen. And so, like, movies like this make my life delightful. It's just, I love a complicated film that's done well.
The other thing that didn't surprise me so much, but I had really forgotten how much humor is sprinkled throughout this movie. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a comedy, but there is a lot of comedic moments throughout this film.
Absolutely.
There's a one point that popped in my head immediately as you said that about I'm not chasing him, he's chasing me.
That's my favorite scene! Dude, Eric, I gotta tell you, when we were choosing who was doing color and who was doing black and white, it tormented me. I'm like, I'm going to lose my favorite scene in the whole movie. Okay, so what am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing this guy. No, he's chasing me. Like, my absolute favorite lines in the entire film. So, my gift to you, sir, my favorite. Because otherwise we were going to go to blows, I think. It's hard to say who's getting which sequence here. But, oh, God, it's so wonderful that, there's so many coming up. The motel sequence. Basically anything involving Dodd has this dark humor to it. And it's just fantastic.
Yeah, but I think we probably should go ahead and jump into the actual scene for today. And
fine.
I think it's fascinating that you're just presented with this giant image of violence, with this Polaroid of this blood-splattered death scene.
In freeze frame, like it's a photo of it. Like, here, look at this blood splatter.
It's presented on screen and it's unflinching. Like it's a good 10 seconds before really you notice anything unusual. And it's just a hand holding this picture. And I'd say it takes a good 20 seconds before you notice anything unusual is going on as the picture slowly starts to fade.
Yeah, it's tough to be more provocative and have a more intense image as an opening to a movie than this shot. And I timed everything here in this shot. We see this shot for about 30 seconds before his hand even shakes for the first time. So you're staring at this image of this hand holding this gruesome Polaroid for 30 seconds as the opening shot of the movie. And then when he shakes it, he holds it for another 10 seconds. He shakes it again, takes another 12 seconds, and then another 9 before the fourth shake. So after that first long one, everything is pretty standard. And, that first shot, the thing is, you don't know what you're looking at. You're like, why am I staring for 30 seconds at this Polaroid? And then after he shakes it, it takes a few seconds to recognize, the photo's a little faded. Why is the photo faded? And then you can say, oh, all right, I now I know what's going on. We're going backwards. The photo is undeveloping.
Mm-hmm.
The short story begins with, or has before the story begins, Nolan has quoted Hemingway, and it says, "What like a bullet can undeceive?" And it's this great idea of, a bullet being, the purpose of a bullet is to be a bullet, right? To do harm, to be projected out of something and to do harm to someone. Hemingway also has another really cool quote that fits in with what this movie starts with. And he says, "If continued far enough, all stories end in death, and he is no true storyteller who would keep that from you." And this is a film that starts with death. You take a movie like American Beauty, where you have this voiceover narration and he says, "This is my neighborhood. This is my street. This is my life." And he says, in 2 weeks, I'll be dead. Of course, I don't know that yet. And it's like, you get a movie like this where somebody's dead in the beginning, and it's no longer about the death. It's about how the hell do we get there? And I think that Nolan is definitely taking that premise and saying, look, I'm showing you from the beginning. See this dude? You're going to see him again. He ain't going to make it to the end of this movie. And just saying, all right, now we have a mystery on our hands. How does this come to pass? And I think taking that shock of somebody being shot so brutally, not to mention someone took a photo of it, and is holding on to that photo. It's taken right out now. So now you've got this tension of, oh crap, when's it going to happen?
Yeah. And I think just this whole concept of this Polaroid undeveloping is really just a fantastic analog to Leonard's memory. Because
Absolutely.
At the beginning of every scene, it's like he has a clear picture. It's like he's taken a snapshot, and then he sees what's going on around him. And then after, 5-10 minutes, that image of what's happening fades, and then he has to take a new picture and start over from the beginning.
And there's a beautiful irony to it, because as each chunk happens, I call them chunks, forgive me, as each sequence happens, Leonard has less awareness. We have more. And so it's really cool that the longer you sit through this film, the more you understand what came before, whereas Leonard is literally the exact opposite.
Right, and also I think there's this additional layer that what you see in the beginning and what you think you know as the movie goes on is slowly unmade piece by piece the farther we get along. Like, even from Leonard's nice suit that he's wearing, eventually you find out, and the nice car that he's driving, you find out that that's not real. And you find out that everything that you think is real and true at the beginning of the movie is actually not true. It's actually an unreliable, just like his memory.
Well, it's the truth, even if it didn't really happen. I'm going to sit here and spout quotes. Sorry, I'm in a literary mood. That's a cuckoo's nest. Another wonderful, unreliable narrator. You have Bromden saying in the beginning of his story, it's the truth, even if it didn't happen. As far as Leonard's concerned, this is the truth. In his grief, he wandered into a Jaguar dealership. It's just, so much. Sorry, I'm sorry. This is going to be a lot of movie quotes dropped because I can't help myself.
And also, like, some of the other details that we see here, and we can't really see it clearly yet, but you can see, like, just the few letters of the Remember Sammy Jenkins on Leonard's hand. And then we see the camera, and he's using a Polaroid 690, which is one of the ones that actually folds closed to make it more portable so it can fit in a pocket, or as Leonard has it strapped over his shoulder. And they typically get 10 photos per film pack. And I think it's funny that I've been talking about layers. Do either of you know how a Polaroid camera actually works?
I'm going to say no. Like, I have a general idea of the concept, but you're going to have the technical definition, so I'll let you do your thing.
Yeah, I could probably make like a pretty educated guess, but I certainly don't know the inner workings.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into super detail, but it's basically like a 3-layer system where the film is made up of these 3 layers. There's the bottom, and 2 of those layers are made up with several other thinner layers. There's like the base layer, which is basically like the negative part of the film that has 3 different layers that are sensitive to red, green, and blue light. And then there's 3 different developers for each of those layers, which actually, develop the negative part of the film. And then you have the top layer, which has the image layer where the final image actually comes out and is displayed, where you get the true colors of the photograph. And there's a layer of acid, and then there's an opaque layer, which is designed to block light once it's exposed to the air. And then there's this middle layer, which is basically the reacting agent, which starts everything happening. It transfers the the negative image onto the image layer, and it starts the acid layer. That's, what you're seeing, because the actual film development happens quicker than what you are actually seeing, which is the acid slowly eating away this opaque layer. And so whenever you're seeing the image, what you think you're seeing is the image develop, but it's actually this acid eating away this opaque layer, so you can see the developed image underneath it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And it's, in general, for older Polaroid film, it generally takes about 90 seconds for that film to be fully revealed. And but these days, like most Polaroid film, it says it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to fully develop. And we see it for, I think, it was like a minute and 15 seconds. So like about 75 seconds, I think. So it's, even the beginning, even though it looks fully developed, I don't think either the film is sped up just a little bit to make it fit, or it just wasn't fully developed whenever we see it at the beginning. And I think it's interesting that even though all the motion of this opening scene is fully in reverse, there is one brief shot that's actually not shot in reverse. And that's the close-up of the bullet shell that rolls on the ground.
Well, also, the first few seconds of the shot, when we first pan up and see Leonard and he's shifting the Polaroid from one hand to the other and he's bringing it towards the camera, there's a few seconds there where it's not obvious yet that is in reverse. Like the way that he is moving until the film goes back inside the Polaroid camera. Mm-hmm. You could think that that's a forward-moving scene, and I think that that's really cool that we start out with the movie with the photo developing backwards. You think, all right, we're watching something backwards, and then you're a little disoriented because, oh, wait, maybe we're not. This is normal. Oh, we are backwards because it – and so I like that. It immediately hits you right off the bat.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, and this was the part of the commentary that I remembered because that scene, that shot of the bullet casing is so close up that there would be no way. I mean, you could do it, but it would take, dozens of takes for it to roll and land and stop right in the middle of frame. So that one, they actually filmed that forwards, and that's just Christopher Nolan blowing on it to make it spin around.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And it's also interesting that most of the sound is actually forward, because it, like the camera flash, that's a forward-facing sound. They don't reverse that. The only sound that's really reversed is the final Teddy scream whenever he shouts no, and that's reversed. But even like the gunshot is a forward-sounding gunshot.
That makes sense, yeah, because it otherwise we wouldn't be, our ears would register too much as being off, I think. So that makes a really good point. Not to mention David Julian's gorgeous score. Like these minor chords, this beautiful swelling music that gets replayed throughout various points in the film. I mean, like, I could just sit there with my eyes shut and just listen to this opening sequence as the titles come up. And it's really interesting that you have this beautiful music kind of lulling you while you're staring at this carnage. It's this really great conflict right from the beginning. Your eyes are seeing one thing, your brain is trying to comprehend the fact that it's actually in reverse, that something is undeveloping, and then at the same time you're hearing this music that's very calming and relaxing, and there's a lot to that too, I think.
Well, that's interesting. I had a complete opposite reaction to that song. I thought this song was haunting.
Oh, I friggin' love it, though.
I'm not saying that as a negative. I think it's an incredible song, but I was like, wow, what haunting music to have here over this opening titles and over this opening scene.
I love it.
Yeah, it is. It's very, it is very slow paced, and even though it's, it starts things off very slowly, and then it like builds to a crescendo, because it's, we're starting off on completely still motion, and then we get the film going back into the camera, and that starts getting more motion. But even like after that, we get it's the very close up shot of like the blood trickling down the wall in reverse,
Mm-hmm.
and we see Leonard's blood splattered face, and then it's like the pace keeps building slowly but surely until you get to the very end where you have this, you can't get much faster than the gunshot right where it cuts. But that's, that's really all I have. It's, we see, Teddy's glasses by themselves too. Before we see Teddy, and I think it's interesting to focus on, this one aspect of the character of Teddy before we actually, we see him in the photograph, and then we see his blood, and then we see his glasses, and then we finally see him, and even then we see him, he's face down, so we were seeing the back of his head,
Mm-hmm.
and even like at the very end, it's only we just barely catch a blurred image of the front of his face before the scene cuts.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I lament for the loss of the art of introductory titles, right? Like, you don't get opening credits anymore, and just this gradual building of here's the beginning of the movie. Nowadays, you just start with a prologue scene and move on from there. You're lucky if somebody gives you a blank screen with a title on it. And I think this gives you that time to sit and to sort of take it in and to start letting your brain warm up to what you're about to see. And
Yeah.
it's one of the masterful examples out there in film of here's how you start a movie. Here's how you get the credits out there.
Yeah, I agree with you for the most part. I do think that there are some movies that benefit from jumping straight into the action, but I do think that it is appreciated to settle you into a movie with some opening credits and kind of a slow introduction into the film that you're about to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, like I said, that's, wraps up my notes. It's, we don't really get a whole lot, and yet, there is just so much to this opening. Like, it sets up this movie in such a poignant and beautiful and concise way.
Yeah, my only other note here for this opening shot is when we see the gun flying backwards into his hand, when we see him, the close-up of his face, when he's dealing with the Polaroid, when he's actually even pulling the trigger, it is, to me, very noticeable and striking that we've got this very violent scene with this gory image, and Leonard's face is so detached emotionally. It's just a complete stone face. There's no emotion there. He's not angry. He's not sad. He's not happy. He's nothing. It's just this complete, I think, a really good job there by Guy Pearce, just having a completely flat, unreadable expression. So you don't know, not only are we confused by, all right, we know someone's dead, and I guess we're going to spend the movie figuring out why, but you're also like, well, why did this guy kill him? He's so completely detached from the moment.
Yeah, he's going back to the whole metaphor of this opening scene. He's like a blank photograph.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah, I love that too, and that's something that's, I think I had it in my head, but I didn't think to voice it. So thank you for bringing that up. But yeah, that's all I have. Unless Lisa, do you have anything else that you want to say about this opening scene?
I think I have brain dumped enough for one episode.
All right, well, once again, I am really looking forward to taking this journey through Memento with the both of you. And, this episode should come out on a Monday. And after this episode's with me and Lisa, the black and white scenes will come out every Thursday. And then the color scenes with me and Eric and a guest Lisa's episodes will also have guests. The scenes with me and Eric.
I don't know how anybody is.
Yeah.
Stingy over here, this one.
But the scenes in color with me and Eric and guests will come out every Monday from here on out until we get to the end of the film. But yeah, I'd like to thank you. And once again, Lisa, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody else where they can find you online?
So you can find me in the Rabbit Hole Podcasts Network. I'm on a couple of podcasts there. I'm on the sort of permanently in hiatus, the Sib List, where my brother and I were working through a number of movies based on a couple of lists, two of which were our personal lists of doom. There are about 13 or so episodes out there that you can still listen to, so maybe that'll tide you over until we get our act together. Get back into it. You can catch me on Between the Scares, which is a podcast in which Jason Soto and I are working our way through every film that Jason Blum or Blumhouse Productions have put out into the world, for better or for worse. And you can also catch me on Whatever with Jason Soto, where we just talk about whatever the heck Jason wants. And that can get a little crazy sometimes, so try not to judge me too hard. I'm also on the Lambcast quite a bit, because for a while there, I was just making a career of guesting on other people's podcasts, and they keep inviting me back. So I figure, why not?
Yeah, the Lambcast is always a fun time.
Love it.
And Eric, where else can everybody find you online?
So I'm a veteran of the Movies by Minute community. I've done 2 Movies by Minute shows before. I did Escape from New York Minute and I did Flash Gordon Minute. So those are both available on any podcatcher that you have, and they both still have the Facebook fan groups open. It's Brains Library is the one for Escape from New York Minute, and then for Flash Gordon Minute, it's the Flash Gordon Minute Listeners Vortex.
And I've been Bubbawheat. And you can find me on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, and you can join that to discuss. It's called It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that to discuss episodes as they come out, as well as have discussions on other time loop movies and TV episodes. And you can go on there and argue on whether or not you agree with us, whether or not Memento is a time loop movie or not. And so until next time, wait a minute. I assume I've already told you about Memento?
Only every time I see you.